Welcome to the Ellis Talker Show. If you enjoy our content, please like or subscribe.
Hi, and welcome to the Ellis Talker Show. I'm DV LeBron. Do you have construction needs? Maybe you want to get something done around the house? Check out K&H Construction. Chris Helms, local guy out of Waxahachie. He'll take care of you. Let him know DV LeBron sent you. Today, my very special guest is world-renowned neuroscientist, author, Dr. Mark Williams. How are you doing, sir?
I'm good, DV. How are you, mate?
I am good. You know, I'm so grateful that you came on because you are doing great work on exposing what technology is doing to our brains. And I saw a clip of you on 60 Minutes Australia, and then you've been on all kinds of different medias, and you've talked about this at length and written books. So I'm really grateful that you've come on, sir.
Thank you for having me, mate.
So I wanted to give if you could give a bio before we kind of move on into the good stuff, because there's a lot to cover. If you could kind of give a bio for my audience.
So I did a Bachelor of Science and I majored in both psychology and neurophysiology. And then I went over and worked at MIT for a few years in the McGovern Institute for Brain Research, which was a fantastic place to work. But I was actually there when the first iPhone came out, which was, of course, a fantastic place to be when the first iPhone was released in the US. So I saw the start of all of this. And, you know, I'm a neuroscientist. I can program in, 5 different languages. So technology to me is amazing. And there's amazing things we can do with it. And we are doing with it. But since having kids, 15, no, longer than that. I won't say how long ago. That was a while ago. But since having kids, I've just seen the damage that's been done both in schools and also in the general population because of their devices. Not because the devices are bad, but because of the way they've been set up to make huge amounts of money for certain individuals, and that's at that's at the expense of us, of the general population. I think that's really sad.
You're a neuroscientist. You look at the brain and how that functions. Now, when you're studying how technology changes the human brain, at what point, Doc, did you realize these screens are becoming more than just tools? They're reshaping our brain.
Yeah, there was some great work that actually came out a few years ago from the US and showed that preschoolers who had been given devices, screens to use before they went to school, were showing abnormal development of their what we call the white matter tracts, so the connections between the left brain and the right side of the brain, and the connections all across the different areas of the brain. And those areas were developing abnormally in these kids who have been given devices. So that was a really big wake-up call, and that resulted in a lot of research since then, and that's been replicated multiple times now, not only in kids, but now we're seeing it in teenagers and in young adults, abnormal development of these, both the white matter tracts, those areas that connect all the different areas, but also the grey matter, so the actual area where the neurons are that do all the work. So it is really concerning, especially around the neuroimaging that we're getting now, showing the brain changes that are occurring.
You had in one of the interviews that I saw on 60 Minutes Australia, the guy asked you a very poignant question: is this technology giving our children Alzheimer's early? And is that the things that you're seeing in the brain? Is that similar?
Yeah. So what we're seeing is basically the brain sort of folded up so it'll fit into the skull. So, there's a huge amount of mass and we're trying to get it into the skull. And so it's folded up. And so you have all these ridges. And what we're seeing is in teenagers who are using devices a lot, there's actually gaps in those ridges. So there's not as dense as a normal person would be. And we see these very similar effects in people with dementia and Alzheimer's and things, which is really concerning. But the other real concern is that we're seeing we saw a 400% increase in early onset dementia, and that's amongst 35 to 44-year-olds. The early onset dementia that we're seeing went up 400% in only 2 years. And they're the first ones that have sort of had it for a number of years during some pretty critical periods of their lives. And we're also seeing in China, they saw the youngest person who's a 19-year-old be diagnosed with dementia, and he'll be dead within a few years. Which is, again, really, really concerning. And we know that dementia you're much more susceptible to dementia if you're not using your brain as much, right? The less you use your brain, the less you exercise it, just like any other part of your body, the more likely you are to get dementia. And when we're on devices, we're not using our brain as we should be. And so therefore, we are more likely to get things like dementia and those things. Plus, we're seeing a whole raft of other problems as well in society.
You would think that because there's so many things that happen in these screens like TikTok and stuff, there's always something flashing, some music, some things. Is that dumbing us down, or that's not stimulating the brain enough? What's the difference between that and reading a book sitting there versus somebody having a screen in their face?
Yeah, the best way I think to describe it is the difference between entertainment and engagement, right? When you're being entertained, somebody else is producing whatever it happens to be, and you're just watching it. You're not actually engaged in it all. It's just washing over you. And that's what's happening when you're on a device. When you're engaged in something like reading a book, it takes effort, and that effort actually stimulates areas of the brain and gets us attending to what's actually happening. It gets our working memory, which is really important for retaining information and getting us critical thinkers and all these sorts of things active as well. So when you're reading a book, a whole bunch of other areas in your brain are active. When you're just viewing something on TikTok or whatever, you're being attracted to it, but you're not actually engaging. You're just being entertained by it, which means that you're not actually using all these really important areas of your brain.
So as a parent that's watching this show, we get busy lives. We got our kids running around. We got work. There's so many things that happen. And some parents will say, hey, look, play on my phone just to keep them busy. It becomes the babysitter. And I'm not faulting them. I know that so many things happen in life. But Doc, can you talk about what effects it has on the brain at that early age and why it's detrimental?
Yeah, so we now know that the younger a child is given a device, or the more time they spend on a device, the more likely they will be diagnosed with ADHD, which is an attentional disorder. And there's a lot of now causative data actually showing there's a causative relationship. So it's that the devices are actually causing ADHD in some kids. And we've got huge increases, 400, 500% increase in diagnosis of ADHD in our society. And so we really need to start looking at that. And I'm not saying everybody who's been diagnosed with ADHD because of the devices. What I'm saying is that you've got a genetic disorder which results in ADHD, but then there's obviously something else happening as well where the devices are actually also causing ADHD, which is a different issue that we need to be dealing with. And we could get rid of a lot of those diagnoses if we actually started dealing with that. And so, yeah, we need to be careful of that. What's happening is, it's flicking you around constantly. So all those short videos and everything are getting your attention to flick from one thing to another really, really quickly. But in the real world, we actually have to attend to stuff for long periods of time. But the kids aren't learning how to do that, to attend to things for long periods of time. And to do that, you need to train it. You need to work on it. And, when we were kids, we used to go and just play footy for a while, or you just go and hang out with your mates for a while, or you'd fix your bike, or you do all those sorts of things. And when kids aren't doing that anymore, and that's the real problem, is it's what they're missing out on rather than what they're actually doing on the devices. So they need to get off the devices and actually do things that are really good for their brains so that they'll develop those abilities. So they'll be able to sit in the classroom and actually do work and actually get good marks and so on. And I don't blame the parents, because we didn't know this 10 years ago, 15 years ago. This is all really, really new. And so I just think we need to get it out there so parents are aware of it. And I do a lot of parent events, and I always say to parents, doing the really hard stuff when they're young means that it's really easy when they're much older, when they're teenagers. But doing the really easy stuff, like giving them a device when they're young, means you're going to have hell later on in life, because they're going to have a whole bunch of, we know that being on a device causes mental health issues. It causes your IQ to drop, so you're not as intelligent. It causes ADHD and other symptoms like that. It causes behavioral problems. There's a whole raft of things that are happening when kids are put on devices at a young age, or when kids spend a lot of time on devices, and we need to be dealing with that. And we haven't even talked about, problems with anorexia nervosa and bulimia nervosa. I work a lot in the Eating Disorders Australia, and the increase in that area as well has been huge, right? And if a teenager or a child gets one of those disorders, it's devastating, not only for the person, but also for the whole family, right? And so we need to be really protecting these kids more.
Now, and you have a point there where there's been lawsuits in the US against Instagram because of the things that these kids, they see these girls on Instagram, other peers, and it's not real. The production is not real, but these kids are, this is what they're forming their brains to. Like, would be what, if I could look perfect, this is how I would look. And I could imagine that that's translating to those kind of problems, and you're seeing it in your studies?
Yeah, absolutely. And you got to remember that social media, there's nothing social about social media. They're very good at labeling these things, but they're not actually what they're doing, right? Social media is about advertising. And so you're either advertising a company or an event or a website or a podcast or whatever, or you're advertising yourself. And for kids and teens to be growing up believing that advertising themselves is how they actually get friends and how they get liked, right, is really, really, really unhealthy for them. And so, yeah, we have a whole generation now, both boys and girls, right? Boys, there's been a huge increase in boys with body dysmorphic issues who
Wow.
are trying to use injections and all the rest of it to make themselves big and strong and buffed and all the rest of it. And it's becoming a real problem for them as well as the girls. But we need to realize that it's not social, it's advertising. The other big problem is that what they're actually doing on there, right? I was reading the other day that if a girl on TikTok deletes a picture of herself, within 500 milliseconds, she'll start getting advertising from cosmetics companies because they know that she's feeling bad about herself. And so they'll start advertising cosmetics to her to actually get her to buy cosmetics to make her feel worse about herself so that she'll actually buy things to cover things up and all the rest of it. And that happens within 500 milliseconds of her deleting a post of herself. If she deletes a post of someone else, it doesn't happen. So it's really, really is targeted. And we need to realize this. And these kids are constantly being bombarded with this information, right? You're feeling bad, so here's what you actually need to make yourself feel better. And we know that doesn't make you feel better, right? Actually getting out and spending time with real people is what makes you feel better.
Speaking of the real people, I'm Generation X, and we had to talk to people. We had to learn early on that there's gonna be people you don't like, and you learn how to deal with those people in more productive ways. Sometimes it wasn't so productive, but you learn how to deal with people, whether it be the fights or it be the arguments or just getting along afterwards. These kids nowadays, because of the screen time, they're not developing this ability. What are you seeing in that as far as their impulse control, their ability to conversate? How is this social media affecting that?
Yeah, and that's again, it's an example, a really good example of where it's what they're missing out on rather than what they're doing, which is a real problem, right? And what they're missing out on is that opportunity to learn how to actually communicate. And what's really sad is, like, we as a species, we didn't evolve to be the alpha species on this planet because of the fact that we're the fastest, right? Because we're not the fastest and we're not the strongest and we don't have the largest brain and we don't have the most complex brain of any species on this planet Earth. We actually got to this level where we are now because of our ability to socialize, because we actually formed big groups and actually helped each other and protected each other and did all those things, right? And that's what our brain's actually wired for. We have these big frontal lobes to enable us to actually do that, to socialize, to spend time with each other, to empathize. And they're not learning that now, which is really sad. So we're sort of almost de-evolving, right? Because of the fact that they're not learning how to socialize. And it's so, so important for us. And it's really complicated and it's something you need to learn. And we learn it as a kid and as a teenager by going out there and, as you said, by actually doing it, right? And sometimes, the other child will take their toy and walk away and you realize, oh, I shouldn't have done that, I won't do that again next time.
Mhm.
Or you walk away because you didn't like what they did and you realize what your boundaries are and what their boundaries are and what you're willing to put up with and what they're willing to put up with and how to negotiate and how to do all those really important things, which are really important for us when we get to work, right? Because we've got to do all those things when we get to work. We're not isolated when we're at work. We're actually with other people and we need to learn how to do those really important things as well. Plus, when you're on a device, you miss out on a whole bunch of neurotransmitters, so a whole bunch of chemicals in your brain. So when you're on a device, you get dopamine, and dopamine has, in the media, it's often talked about as though dopamine makes you happy, but it actually doesn't. It's got nothing to do with happiness or joy or anything like that. When dopamine's released, what it does is it makes us actually search for more of what we just had, right? And so when you see a cat video, dopamine's released and says you want more of that, and then you see another cat video, you want more of that, and so you keep searching and searching and searching, and that's why it makes us addicted to things, because we just keep looking for the same thing over and over again. And you can imagine when we were hunter-gatherers, we would have found some berries and eaten them, and dopamine would have released, which would have said, search for more of that because it's good for you, right? And you'd eat more of it and more of it. And then you get full and you go, all right, I've had enough of that. Don't need any more dopamine. I'll go and do something else. But when you're online, you don't get that. You just keep getting search for more, search for more, search for more. And you never find the perfect cat video, right? So you never actually get full. And so that's a problem, because all we're doing is getting dopamine when we're socializing. But when we're in real life, when we actually meet up with someone that we like, the first thing we do is touch them, right? Appropriately. And in all societies, we've got some way of touching each other. So in stoic societies like ours, we'll shake hands. And in Europe, they'll kiss each other on the cheek. And even the Inuits, because they're fully covered, they'll rub noses because it's only part of their body that's actually shown. And the reason we do that is that we have C fibers in our skin. And when we touch each other, those C fibers activate and they release oxytocin in our brain, which makes us more connected to the person that just touched us, which lasts for a long time. It makes us feel more part of a group, more connected with each other, which is really, really important for us. And then we also read the person's body language and facial expressions and prosody of the voice and their eye gaze and all of those things when we're actually face to face. And that releases serotonin and releases a whole bunch of other endorphins, which make us feel really good and make us feel good for longer. And I'm sure, the people who are listening to this have had the experience where you'll talk to someone online or you'll chat with someone on a chat group or whatever, and then you walk away and you don't feel very good because you didn't get all those important neurotransmitters. Whereas you meet someone at a cafe or you meet someone out somewhere and you spend time with them, you feel really good for quite a long time afterwards. And you keep remembering how good that was, that experience, because you get all those really important neurotransmitters. And unfortunately, really sadly, a lot of teenagers and kids, they don't do that. They don't socialize at all. So they never actually get all that really important neurotransmitters, which make them feel good for long, which is why we know that if you just delete all of your social media within a week, you will actually improve your mental health.
Wow.
Just a week of getting rid of it, you improve your mental health.
That was a long story. No, that's fine. No, I love this. I'm getting some great information. So by all means, go on in these stories. But when it comes to these companies that like Instagram and TikTok and others and Facebook, are they trying to create addicts? And have you seen, does it hit the same parts of the brain as addiction? Like if you were shooting up a drug?
Yeah. So what we're seeing is that the addiction is addiction, right? It doesn't matter what you're actually addicted to. And you can be addicted to food, right? You can be addicted to anything. And what we're seeing in these kids and adults and everybody, right, who gets addicted to either device or gets addicted to the apps or gets addicted to gambling or gets addicted because there's online gambling now, or online gaming and all these, and online pornography, all these things, we're seeing addiction occurring. And in the DSM, which is Diagnostic Statistical Manual, which is what psychiatrists and psychologists use, in there now is internet gaming disorder. And that's treated exactly the same as alcohol, as drug addiction and these other things. And the treatment is exactly the same. The outcomes are exactly the same. The diagnosis is exactly the same. So, yeah, what we're seeing is the same thing. But what's really concerning is if you get addicted to something which is fairly inane, you're more likely to get addicted to other things because you get used to it, right? You get used to whatever it is and you're looking for a bigger high. You're looking for a bigger hit. And we know that if kids who get addicted to gaming are more likely to then get addicted to other things, especially gambling, because the gaming apps, the free ones that are online, they actually, most of their revenue comes from advertising gambling apps. And so the kids who are gaming and getting addicted to gaming then are much more likely to get addicted to gambling. And if you get addicted to gambling, you're much more likely to get addicted to alcohol and drugs later on. So, it's this serial thing where you keep upping the hit. And that's a real concern.
Now, when you look at these kids nowadays, they seem to be more depressed, more anxious than other generations, or maybe they could express it more. There's all kinds of things that people can say, but what have you seen your studies show between the connection between this online media, these social media, and this anxiety, this rise in anxiety and depression?
Yeah, it's very clear now. They're originally, 10 years ago, we were seeing some of the data, and there was lots of controversy as to whether it was correlate. Well, the data was correlational, and so therefore we couldn't actually show causation. And there's lots of people arguing other reasons for it, as a food or as the water they were drinking, or lots and lots of reasons for this big increase in anxiety and depression amongst teenagers, but also in society more generally. But now there's literally thousands of studies that have come out now showing correlational, but also causational studies showing that the more you're on a device, the more time you spend on social media, the more time you spend gambling, the more time you spend on internet pornography, all these things, the more likely you are to be depressed and be anxious. And when you get off those things, when you stop using them, it goes away. And so there's this causative link between the two. And so we need to be doing it less. All of us, I think, need to be doing it less. But especially we need to be protecting the younger kids, because they don't have the frontal lobes, executive functions yet to make the decisions, right? That's why we limit alcohol until they're much later. That's why we stop them from driving until they're later, because they don't have the cognitive function when they're younger to make the right decisions. And so we have to make it for them.
And that social media stuff, it impairs those things. From what I've seen, it impairs those abilities. And the other thing that you see now is that, and this was the cool thing about when the internet came out, and I'm old enough to remember life before the internet. And the cool thing was that you could talk to somebody. It was real basic, back in the day. You had an AOL chat, and you to talk to somebody clear across the country, and you would say things like, how is the weather there? It was very basic conversation. But what I got out of it as growing up through it was looking at it was, wow, we are so disconnected us more than ever before in the history of man. We are more connected to each other at any point in history. Yet these kids are, I mean, it's noticeably disconnected in so many ways, in their friendships and their ways to communicate. You get them, sometimes you'll see posts online where, hey, is there anybody willing to hang out? And they've got no real friends. And so tell me, did social media really unite the world, or did it get us more distant?
No, it got us more distant. And there's, again, multiple reasons for that. One is because we're not actually going out and spending time with people, right? And friends are people who are there when you need them, right? They're people who, you have a bad day and they'll come and have a coffee with you. They're people you can call up when, something's not working. They're people that you can actually spend real time with face to face. And so we know that the more friends you have on social media, the less friends you have in real life, which is really sad. And we need friends in real life. And so that's caused a big problem. But the other big problem is that the online world that we're all spend so much time in isn't real, right? There's nothing real about it. Nobody puts up on social media real stuff. They curate it and they put up there what they think people want to actually see. And most of it's fake. And these days it's even more of it's fake because people are generating fake stuff to put on there. But even before that, people never put up when they, when their kid spilled stuff all over themselves, or, when their kid was, being an absolute ratbag and wouldn't go to sleep. People only put up the really nice stuff. And so we have this view of the world that everybody's got these perfect worlds, and then you're living in your world going, oh, this is not fair. Like, my world's awful and everybody else's world is absolutely perfect. And that's not true. So we're less connected because we don't see what people are really living like. Whereas if you see someone in real life, you see the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? Which is really important for us, because then we go, oh yeah, my life's like that too. So we can connect on that level, but we can't connect on that level online because it's fake. It's not real.
It really is fake. Now, there is a big discussion, and I touched on it earlier, about schools increasingly using technology. There was some news reports that came out where they were doing a AI school where the kids were coming in, but it was a AI screen that was doing it. And there's, in schools locally where I live, there were tablets hanging out or being given out, and they use a lot of technology in it. Do you think that they're moving too fast without, knowing the neural consequences of it?
Yeah, I think the mental health issues that we're seeing, a real problem that we need to be dealing with, and that's, been exacerbated by the technology in the schools. But also, you need to connect with your teacher to actually learn from your teacher, because frontal lobes, which are huge, have evolved to enable us to learn really easily from people we trust. And so if you trust someone, if you trust your teacher, you'll like your teacher, then you'll learn from them really easily. But if you've got a screen in between you and your teacher standing up in the front of the class, then you're going to attend to your screen. You're not going to attend to them. So you're not actually going to have a relationship with them. So you're not going to learn from them very well. And we also know that you learn about 25 to 30% less when you read something on a screen than if you read it in paper. So reading in paper actually results in better learning. And we know that if you handwrite your notes, you remember the information again about 25 to 35% better than if you actually type the notes. And we know that kids who learn how to type rather than learn how to write actually have poorer reading comprehension. And we're not sure why that is, but they do end up having poorer reading comprehension. And of course, reading comprehension is really probably one of the most important things for success later on. So, there's a whole bunch of reasons. And we also know this, the countries like the US and here in Australia as well, that have adopted these technologies and put them in schools, their scores internationally have dropped significantly, both, in literacy, in mathematics and in science, and continue to drop because of that. And there's a whole bunch of countries that have actually started adopting the technology and seeing themselves dropping when it comes to the results in those areas. And so they've taken out the screens and put the old textbooks back into the schools and shown them gone back up again. So there's some really good evidence that this is really detrimental. And if you look at the top countries when it comes to outcomes and high school, they've all got very little technology, if any at all. And so, yeah, we've been duped. We really have. We need to realize we've been duped, right? I have not seen an educational app that actually shows improvements in learning.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's right.
From a neuroscientist standpoint, if you could snap your fingers tomorrow, would you remove technology from schools? Should they, not all technology, but what would be smart technology? What would be the smart way of doing this if you had to use technology in the classroom?
Yeah, so I would have the teacher should have access to technology, because of course they can put their classes on there and they can do all that, and that's fine, right? So teachers should have access to technology. I'm not saying get rid of it from the teachers, but the students in 95% of the cases should not have technology in the classroom. What we should have is, like we used to have, science room, a room where all the technology is, where the students can actually go and use it when they actually need to use it. But there's only one or two classes where the student would actually need to use it, and that's if they were doing something around technology, if they were but there's no reason to have technology in an English class or in a maths class or in a science class or a history class, right? Because those classes, you get a textbook and you read the textbook and you'll remember the information better and you take notes from the textbook, and you don't get increases in cortisol, which we get when we're using devices. And so that would be my ideal. But if you look, there's the Waldorf schools in the Silicon Valley, right, where huge numbers of the tech billionaires send their kids, where they have no technology, right, because they know that they learn better when they don't have technology, and they're more innovative and creative when they don't have technology, and they learn all the important skills such as communicating with each other and collaborating with each other and being a leader, which involves communication and collaboration. And they learn, the number one indicator of how successful someone will be is how good they can read, right? And learning how to read, you need a book. And you need to actually read the book, not be on a device watching TikTok videos or watching YouTube videos. So I would get rid of them and just have one technology lab, if you like, where the students can go on those rare occasions when they actually need to use them.
When is it kind of moving into the parents front, because I wanted to have you on to kind of communicate to the parents that watch this. What age? Because there's a lot of people who say, "Well, my kid needs a phone because of this, because of that." What age would you say is there an appropriate age for a kid to have a cell phone and have these screens?
Yeah, it's a great question. And it's a really hard one to answer because it really depends on the situation that you're in. I have two teenagers, and we gave them access to a smartphone when they went to high school because they both travel quite a way to high school, and they're both into a lot of extracurricular. They do sport and all those sorts of things, and so they were going to their training or they're going to the sporting event and then coming back on the bus. And my daughter also works in a Chinese restaurant, so working late and then coming home, and so we wanted her to be able to contact us. But I think one thing that we get wrong as parents is when we give them access to a phone, we say, I bought you a phone and here it is in your phone, right? But you don't have to do that, right? You can say, I'm giving you access to a phone, here it is, but it's still under my control, right?
Right.
It's not yours. It's not yours to use whenever you want. It's for you to use when you actually need to use it. And so when you're at home, you don't need to use it because you're at home, you're safe. So it goes away and it gets plugged in somewhere in a general area. It never goes into the bedroom, it never goes into the bathroom because those are the two really, really scary areas, right? Those are the areas where really bad stuff happens. So never goes in the bathroom, never goes into a bedroom, and it gets plugged in a common area. And all the phones get plugged into that area. But yeah, I think the mistake a lot of parents do is, here's a phone for your birthday and it's yours. And then they allow them to control it. And it shouldn't be that way. It should be that the parents control it and it's given to them as for safety when they're actually traveling, all those sorts of things. Because that's what they need it for, right?
Right. Now, how can a parent know that their child may already be getting neurologically overstimulated with these screens?
Yeah, that's another good question. So my son's obsessed with basketball and loves basketball, and he also has the Y2K game on Nintendo that he loves playing, right? Which is a basketball game that he loves playing with all of the things. And I know that that's okay because if I turn around to him and say, hey, do you want me to take you down to the basketball courts to play a few pickup games because there's a whole bunch of pickup games that often happen down to basketball courts. And if he ever says to me, no, I'd rather be playing Y2K, then I know there's a problem, right? Because there's no way any teenager should prefer playing a video game than going down and actually doing the real thing.
Right.
Actually playing basketball, right? Because if he's playing basketball on the game, it's not the same as playing a real basketball game down at the courts. And that to me is the indication, right? How do they respond when I give them another option? Do they decide to just give it up and do the other option, which is better? Or do they make that whole sissy fit thing go on, right? Lose their shit because you've told them that they've got to get off the device. And I think that's a great indication.
That is a major thing. I mean, I've heard of that, and I actually experienced that with my kids when you took the video games. Heck, my mom experienced it with me when we had Nintendo in the 80s. It was getting me off that game was something fierce. Now, in your studies that you've seen, because I kind of want to touch on this one a little bit before I move into kind of the bigger part of this, is have you seen that it seems to rob the ambition of these kids as they get stuck on those video games and they're on there, they're gamers, they're on there, they're not moving from that screen? Do you think that it robs their ambition?
Yeah, I think ambition comes from hope, right? Hope is about, I hope I'm going to be a blah, right? I hope I'm going to go on and be successful. I hope that, I'm going to be able to play basketball better next week. I hope that whatever. But you need hope, right? You need to have that vision. You need what it is that you actually want to be. And if you're just addicted to, if all you're thinking about all the time is the next cat video or the next Instagram reel or the next game on a gaming app or the next whatever, then you're never thinking about who I want to be, who I want to become. You never have hope, right? And hope is so important for us as humans. We need to have hope because that's what drives us forward and that's what gives us ambition. And if you're having time to contemplate that, then you're not going to have it. You're not going to, and that's what they need to do. And that's what we all need to be doing, right? Is just having time to contemplate, having time to be bored. Boredom's awesome, right? Because boredom makes you go, oh, I'm bored. What am I going to do? And you come up with innovative and creative things to do. I mean, I'm sure you were the same. When I was a kid, if I said, I would never say to my parents, I'm bored, right? Because
No,
straight
that was
away,
the
it'd be,
worst thing.
mow
Yeah.
the lawn, right? They would
Yes.
give you things to do.
Yeah.
Yet now, kids say I'm bored, and parents hand them a phone or they hand them whatever, right? And that's just nuts, right?
It's
You've got to, if they are bored, give them something to do, which is going to be beneficial to you. Yeah. And otherwise, they're going to find things to do. And most of that time, it'll be, like, fun things. Pull your bike apart and put it back together or whatever, do something.
That's what we did before there was no YouTube or nothing. You pulled your BMX out and you worked on it as best you could, trying to put it together. And you learn those things by doing and not just watching. But what did you like in the next 10 years? What worries you because you've dedicated your life to this. What worries you the most that gets you wanting to talk to people about the troubles that are coming with this social media and this screen time?
Yeah, my biggest concern is the evidence now suggests that the next generation will be dumber, will have less cognitive capacity, or will be dumber than their parents. And that's the first time that's ever happened in our history, right? Is that the next generation is going to be dumber than us. And that really concerns me. And that's really, really scary because they're the ones that are going to have to take over, right? They're going to have to look after us when we're old. And they're going to have to rule, right? They're going to have to be the next president. They're going to have to be the next what? And we need good people in those positions. We need smart people in those positions. And that's not, I don't see that happening at the moment. And that's really sad. The other thing is that there is a lot of people now are talking about the fact that those who have good attentional capacity, those who are able to attend to things for long periods of times, are going to be the most successful in the future. And those are the people who are being kept off the devices. So we're going to have a real divide between the people who got addicted and spent a lot of time on devices and those that didn't have a lot of time on devices and are very, very successful. And at the moment, a lot of those seem to be the people who in the tech industry who know that it's really harmful for you and stop their kids from using it. And then everybody else is going to be screwed. And that really worried me.
Do you think that, how now or, a few years back, there was these big lawsuits on, Marlboro because of the Marlboro Man and cigarettes and their use, and there was big settlements about that. Do you think that one day they're going to look back at, these tech companies, these social medias and come to the same thing?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's where we're headed now, especially, the recent court case in the US. I know there's other court cases coming up here in Australia and in the UK and so on. So, yeah, I think that's what's going to happen. I see it very similar to smoking, right? When I was a kid, everybody smoked. I started smoking when I was like 12.
Me too.
And everybody around me smoked. Grew up in a small country town. Everybody smoked. And then they started suing them and did all those sorts of things and stopped. And now hardly anyone smokes around here anyway. Right. And you go to a lot of places and they don't smoke in all those smoking restaurants and all those sorts of things. So, yeah, I definitely see it going that way. But again, a lot of people are going to be harmed before that happens. A lot of people were harmed by the cigarettes and ended up with emphysema and all these sorts of things as a result of it. And I think a lot of people are going to be harmed by this. And there already are. The number of teenagers and even kids who have suicided as a result of what's been happening online and all these things is just horrendous. And so, the quicker we can turn this around, the better, I think.
Do you think that these technology companies are conducting a big experiment on our kids? I mean, because I'm sure they have the resources to know things about the brains like you've studied. Do you think that they're willfully doing this?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's evidence for that, right? They know what's actually happening and they're not changing it. I think it was Trent Harris who worked for Facebook who was talking about when he was there. I'm pretty sure it was Trent Harris who said he programmed a thing into Facebook when it was pretty new, which you could press a button and it would send out a message to all your friends on Facebook saying, I'm in New York this week. Does anyone want to catch up or whatever? And so people could actually get connected, right? Be social. And straight away, the executives there said no and deleted it and said no, because if people press that button, then they'll actually won't be on Facebook, and they'll actually be hanging out in real life. And we don't want that. We don't want them social. We want them on Facebook. And so, and that was that was really early on in the whole Facebook thing. And yeah, there's huge amount of evidence now, I think, from all of the investigations and stuff that have gone on. And I know there's been multiple government inquiries in the US that have, interviewed and gone through the data and so on, and shown that they knew what they were doing, and they continue to know what they're doing. But they make too much money, right? They make huge amounts of money, and then they get these $200 million fine or whatever, and that's not going to hurt them.
Right, right. That it isn't. Now, when you look at, there's a term now that's out there, and it's called doom scrolling. Can you talk about how that affects you scientifically? What that does to your brain when you're doing that doom scrolling, constantly doom scrolling? And I'm sure you've seen what that does with your sleep patterns and how your brain functions with sleep. Can you kind of just touch on that?
Yeah, so doom scrolling is just, again, it's this, you're getting dopamine, which again isn't making you happy. It's just telling you, look for more of that. And so you look for more of it. And so you end up just doom scrolling, just going through things. And because it's constantly changing, your brain's flicking from one thing to another, to another, to another. And so it's releasing cortisol, which is the stress hormone, because that's not the way the world works, right? The world's slow, and you usually look at one thing for a long period of time, not really short periods of time. So your brain's constantly in this stress. It's stressed because things are changing so quickly, which is not good for our brains, but it's also stressed because it's constantly getting dopamine, which is telling it to do more of it. Plus, the screens give off what we call blue light, and the blue light activates areas of your brain which also make you anxious and stressed. And we get more cortisol, which also makes you anxious and stressed. And so all of those things then impact our sleep. So then we can't get to sleep at night when we're trying to get to sleep at night. So I always recommend to people, don't be on a device for at least an hour before you go to bed, right? Read a book, or just talk to your family or your loved ones, or whatever. Do something else an hour before you go to sleep to get rid of all of that out of your system, so then you can actually go to sleep straight away. And sleep is so important for us, because during sleep you go through multiple different stages, but one of the stages is your whole brain sort of washes out all of the toxins in your brain from that day. And we know that people who don't sleep well actually, again, are much more likely to get Alzheimer's and other dementias later on in life, because they're not washing out all those toxins regularly. And you need to be washing out all those toxins regularly. But in younger kids and in teenagers, they actually basically learn how to be more social when they're actually sleeping, because you go through scenarios, your brain sort of tries to work out what you did that day and how you can do things better the next day. And so if you're sleeping for long periods of time, you actually get smarter, right? Because you're going through all those scenarios and working out how to do things better. And so kids need to be sleeping. Yeah, I mean, young kids, preschool kids need to be sleeping 10 to 11 hours a day, right? Your high school kids need to be sleeping 9 to 10 hours a day. And we need to be sleeping somewhere between 6 and 8 hours a day.
Wow. Now, when you look at and this is more on the adults before we kind of close out, when it comes to adults, one of the things that, I've experienced and others have experienced is this brain fog. And then the other thing that we've experienced is, like, maybe not clinically diagnosed, but all of a sudden we're having symptoms of ADD, ADHD as adults. We're in our 40s, close to 50, and we're starting to develop these things and these brain fogs. Can you kind of tell me what's happening with the brain there with us that are a little bit older, that have gotten into all this screen time?
Yeah, we now know that our brains are basically plastic, right? They're constantly changing, and it's based on this use it or lose it paradigm. So that when you're using it, it gets stronger, and when you're not using it, it gets dumber, right? It starts atrophying. And we've known that. Some of the first studies to actually show that were in nursing homes, because in nursing homes, we used to put people in nursing homes and we'd put them in front of a TV and we'd feed them. They wouldn't do much, right? And they'd die prematurely, and they get Alzheimer's and these diseases prematurely. And then we realized that you had to constantly work their brains. You had to exercise their brains. And so then we started, organizing, we give them the menus and they could choose what they actually wanted to eat. And we'd have people go in there and entertain them and teach them, how to do things and play musical instruments and all sorts of fun stuff. And we found that when you do that, people live about 10 to 15 years longer, and they're much less likely to get Alzheimer's and all those sorts of things. So you need to be using your brain, and it gets stronger. If you don't use it, it slowly atrophies. And we know your brain today will be different than it was yesterday. And again, tonight when you're sleeping, it'll change again. It'll be different tomorrow. And so if you're doing stuff which activates your brain and exercises it, then it gets stronger and you get better at it. If you don't, which is what happens when you're online, right, then it slowly atrophies. And that's actually what's happening. And so we can turn that around by getting off the devices and getting out into the real world if we want to. Or we stay on the devices, and that's going to continue. And then you're going to be more likely to get those diseases.
We're adults and we make those choices. What's scary is on, the kid side. They don't have the ability, like you said earlier, to make those decisions long term. We got to be the ones to make it for them, and that's kind of what concerns me. But before I close out, because I could just have you on forever and just ask you all these questions. This stuff is so interesting to me. You wrote 2 books. You've written several books, but the 2 that came up were the Screen Smart Children and the Connected Species. Can you talk about both of them and, how people can get those books?
Yeah, so the Connected Species was my first main book for the general public. And it talks about the fact that we are the connected species, right? We evolved to connect, and how important connection is, and how important that is for us, and how we're being pulled apart now because of the manipulation that's happening in society, and that we've got to come back together and actually collaborate with each other again. We've actually got to reconnect with each other, because that's really important. And this is, our brains actually haven't changed in the last 35,000 years. We've got the same brains as we had 35,000 years ago when we were hunter-gatherers and we were hanging out with each other and spending a long time with each other, only working about 4 hours a day. And then the rest of the time we were just protecting each other and talking and hanging out and spending time with each other. And it's only been the last couple of thousand years that we've created this society where we're competing with each other constantly. And that's not natural. That's not the way we've actually designed. We're designed to actually be empathic and to want to spend time with each other and to want to actually help each other. And so we need to get back to that and start realizing that's important. And this is how and why things like racism and sexism and the divide in politics and all these things have happened, is because of the way things are happening at the moment and how we can turn that around. And then my other book, Screen Smart Children, which is more relevant to what we've been chatting about today, is all on the screens and what the screens have been doing to our brains and doing to our cognition and doing to our memories, and how we can turn that around and how parents can do that better so that their kids don't miss out, but so that their kids can actually thrive, and how we can change how we're doing things in homes and reconnect with each other. Breaking bread, having meals together is so important for us as a species, right? And it's important for us to reconnect over meals, right? And the meals is really important because we're actually giving each other something. We're giving each other that food, which is, but a lot of families will be on devices when they're actually eating, and that's sad, right? And they're missing out. Again, they're missing out on things because of that. That's just one example. And also we need to, you mentioned before, that the kids don't have the cognitive capacity to make these decisions, but we as adults actually need to demonstrate to them as well, right? We can't just tell kids or teenagers what to do. We need to be doing it ourselves. And I always, whenever I do parent events, I always say that, teenagers will do about 10% of what you say, but they'll do about 90% of what you do, right? They mimic us. And so we need to be doing what we want them to do, not just telling them what we want them to do. And that means putting the devices away for all of us and actually sitting down and having real conversations with each other and reading books and hanging out with each other and yeah, working on the car together and
Yeah.
going out and throwing a ball together and doing all those important things that we really need to be doing with each other.
You
So that's what the Bring Smart Children's all about.
you kind of touched on this a little bit of, as far as empathy and the politics and everything. And I know that you've seen how crazy things have gotten. I've seen how crazy things have gotten. And what I've come up with, again, just me, regular, working Joe, is that we've become characters. We're not actual people. We're not real. We're somebody on a screen. So then it's okay to, I guess, hate that person on the screen, or them dying doesn't mean anything to you because it's just a screen thing. Do you think that desensitize, is that happening in the brain? Does desensitize the lack of connection, creating this empathy-less world?
Yeah, absolutely. It's because, as I talked about before, when you're on a screen, you're just getting dopamine. You're not getting all those other really important chemicals being released in your brain. Whereas when you're face to face with someone, you're getting all those other really important chemicals, which make you more connected and make you empathize and make you actually want to spend time with that person. And so, when we see someone crying in real life, we want to put our arms around them, whether or not they vote for the same person as us or not. It doesn't, right? We want to actually help them. When we see it online, we don't get all those important neurotransmitters to tell us, hey, that's a real person that I need to actually connect with and I actually need to help, right? And so we're losing that ability, and that's really, really sad.
Last question before I close out. Would you say that screens are making us more violent?
We know that people who watch internet pornography regularly are more likely to be violent towards women, and there's a huge amount of research showing that. I think they're making us less empathic, which means that we don't respond in the same way as we normally would to people, which means that we don't feel sorry for them, right? And if you don't feel sorry for someone, then you're more likely to allow that violence to happen. I haven't seen evidence that we're actually becoming more violent, but I think there is evidence that we're becoming more willing to accept violence, to just ignore it than
Wow.
we have in the past. And
That is sad. Doc, again, I am so grateful you came on and gave me your time. I mean, and I'm sorry that I held you a little longer than I normally go. This is just such an important topic, and you're doing such great work. I've told you on the email, I love having people on the show that are making humanity better, that have dedicated their lives to doing that. And you are doing that. That is what you've done your life's work on, making humanity better. So, thank you. Thank you so much for doing that with your life. Can you stick around after show real quick?
Yeah, no worries. Thank you, TV. It was
Thank
great.
you.